This is the first of a series of short videos that I'm delighted to be doing surrounding some of the pieces that Victoria put on this wonderful CD she did of some of my music. And the piece I've chosen to talk about in this first video is the Unhappy Aardvark. In a way, if I'm remembered for anything, this is the piece probably I'd like to be remembered for, the Unhappy Aardvark. It's a fairy story, and of course, like all good fairy stories, it ends happily. Originally, interestingly, I wrote it for some lovely friends of mine, two sisters and a brother, who played the violin, clarinet and tuba. So in fact it started its life, curiously, as a little trio, violin, clarinet and tuba, and I actually wrote the story, which is not something I normally do, but there it is. And then I thought, well, that's not a very common ensemble, so I really must find a common ensemble. And one of my favourite ensembles, both to listen to, and I love the repertoire, is the Wind Quintet. The first actual performance of it, which I did with the Wind Quintet that I had going at the time, there's a lovely story behind this, in fact. And I knew through my wonderful teacher John Davis a wonderful actor called Bruce Bower. You might recognise Bruce Bower if you're a Fawlty Towers fan. He played the American tourist in the Waldorf Salad episode, and he also played in some James Bond films, all sorts of things. Anyway, Bruce was going to do it, become the narrator. He was going to come and narrate this first performance. But he hurt his leg a couple of days beforehand. I said, I'm afraid I can't do it, but I've got a friend who's going to do it. So I said, that's great. The friend turned out to be Shane Rimmer. If you happen to be a Thunderbirds fan, as I certainly was and still am, you'll know Shane Rimmer was the voice behind Scott Tracy in the Jerry Anderson series Thunderbirds. Shane Rimmer, also a fine actor. He was in a number of James Bond films also, actually, and many other films. And there he was. First of all, I had to ring him up, and that was one of the most surreal experiences of my life, because his voice is exactly the voice of Scott Tracy on Thunderbirds. So there I was talking to Scott Tracy on Thunderbirds. It was extraordinary. Anyway, he came and narrated the first performance, which was an absolutely delightful experience. The piece overall is fashioned very much in the Peter and the Dwarf sort of idea. There's a narration, there's some music, more narration, and the story unfolds. And a bit like Prokofiev piece Peter and the Dwarf, there are some light motifs. For example, there's the tune that represents the aardvark. There's the tune that represents the ants and the termites. And the tune that represents the very distinguished gentleman. And there's some development as the piece unfolds. The aardvark tune, for example, goes through different guises. Of course, it's a minor tune at the beginning because it's unhappy. But of course, like all fairy tales, as I mentioned, it ends happily. So when the aardvark tune eventually appears, at the end, it's a much more happy major version of it. As I said at the start, I was absolutely delighted that Victoria wanted to make this album of some of my pieces. And when it came to recording the aardvark, we had to decide, well, who's going to narrate it? And by some wonderful coincidence, just around about that time, I was doing some work with the wonderful, legendary actor with the inimitable voice, Robert Hardy. I was doing some work with him with respect to some of my Malcolm Arnold festivals. He actually appeared in 2. And so I got to know him quite well, and I rang up Robert and I said, I don't suppose you would consider narrating this piece? And he said yes. And so I went to pick him up. He didn't live that far from me, actually. I went to pick him up and we drove to this studio. And he put the words down. It was a wonderful afternoon, and he was so nice about it. And of course his voice is just remarkable, and brings such a lot to the performance.
My word, you are a lucky aardvark, said the very distinguished gentleman, because not only am I a very distinguished gentleman, but I am also the world's greatest veterinary surgeon, and I shall give you a new mouth, more like mine.
And a final postscript to this little video. Rather delightfully, a friend of mine, as a present, set it up that I should adopt the 2 aardvarks at London Zoo. I think a lot of zoos do this. So, and here they are. So I adopt these 2 aardvarks at London Zoo, which I visit from time to time when I've got a moment or happen to be in London in the right place.
He had become the happiest of aardvarks.